The limbic system is also the centre that is responsible for homeostasis. It's the centre that's responsible for regulating our system and keeping it on a straight and narrow. So fundamentally, that part of our brain does not like change. It likes things to stay just the way they are. Our limbic system doesn't respond, it reacts. It reacts really, really fast. It reacts emotionally and it reacts hormonally. And it does all these things in accordance with those deepest autobiographical beliefs that we have about life, the universe and everything, and it does so without us being conscious of it. Does that make sense? You're seeing why change can be really, really hard? There's a whole system of protection that's going on within us that's happening separately to conscious thought. And it is really fast and really powerful, and sometimes we don't even know what the grid is that's driving it. So what? Well, like justice systems, OH&S and our immune system, our challenges and experiences have laid down a system of protection, a framework of attitudes, values and beliefs, and they act on autopilot. What are the implications of that? Any thoughts? What does that mean to us? You could do something irrational. You probably will. There we go. So if you want to drive up that driveway, you have to step out of the emotional space where the emotions are determining your behaviour and step into deliberately a logical place so that you can apply some reasoning and planning. What that means to us in terms of navigating change and indeed flourishing through change, if we're aware of that now, if we're aware of the fact that when we're faced with some sort of event or information or change that a part of our brain is going to behave in a particular way, if we're aware of that, then we can actually decide to shift the responsibility for change management from the lizard brain to the executive brain. Yep, we can shift our response, because we know the responses aren't real good. We can shift our response from that limbic system to the prefrontal cortex, where all that decision making, those executive centres of our brain are. How do we do that? How do we do that? Turns out it's reasonably straightforward. Use your words. Hey? Use your words. Use your words. So, when we talk, it's funny, isn't it? When we talk about our feelings, when we talk about that emotional response to change, what we're actually doing is we're drawing on that internal policy. So that internal policy framework that doesn't have words attached to it, when we talk about our feelings, we're accessing that place and working hard to attach language to that policy framework. And we're attaching language to the feeling that we're experiencing. When we use language and we attach words and we attach meaning to something that's otherwise devoid of words and meanings, it means that there's a translation, a conversion taking place that the front of our brain can deal with. Yep. So we've had to say something or write something or pray something or talk about an issue with somebody in order for it to be surfaced out of that deep place and put in front of us in such a way that the reasoning centres of our brain can actually deal with. So now it becomes a problem that we can solve. Or at least it becomes an issue that we can look at logically and objectively and discern a path forward. Seems that girls are reasonably good at this. Yeah? What about the guys? The nothing box. Yep, the compartment. One of the standard things you hear, well, it's a bit of a joke, isn't it? You know, you're not going to make me talk about my feelings, or we're not going to talk about our feelings tonight, are we? And the thing is, it is hard work. It is hard work physiologically to translate that information into language. It doesn't exist in a language. You have to attach those words, which is why kids find it really, really hard because they don't have the words. So unless they've got the vocabulary, it's acted out rather than spoken out. So the more we can build up a vocabulary of emotion, then the more we're able to help our kids speak about what's going on in their brain. And as they're able to verbalise it, then we can help them think about it logically. Final point here. We have a finicky cortex. And what that means is this part of our brain that we want to utilise during change and transition, this part that can actually help us solve problems, the part that can plan, compare, reason, it's really picky in terms of when and how well it works. It consumes masses of energy. So this part of our brain uses more energy than any other part. It needs to have really, really good food, and it demands that you've slept really well. And it has to have the right cocktail of hormones. So it can't work when there's too much adrenaline in the system. So that matters. So if we know that there's a particular event taking place and we've had a feeling about that event, and this is something that I've started to practice doing, recognising when I've had a feeling and then consciously pull this into the front of my brain. I also need to recognise the fact that there are certain times and situations where that part doesn't work well. It's got to be fed well, and it has to have slept well, yeah, and it can't be flooded with adrenaline and those sorts of things. So it's a bit of a princess, this front part of our brain. Okay, so what do I do with all of this? And this is where I'm going to finish. There's 4 things that you can do with this information, and I get that it's a fair bit of stuff to wade through. 4 things that you can do. Firstly, just recognise the fact that your reaction to change is a complex and subconscious process. It might not be linked with reality. So your reaction to change can have more to do with your grid and framework of experiences and beliefs and attitudes than it has had with the event that's just taken place. Second thing, convert this emotional response, that emotional information, into words so that you can apply reason and judgment to the issue. And see, that's also where self-talk is important as well. Self-talk is about converting things into words. Talk with someone else. So the process of dialogue, talking with somebody else about that framework of values and about that emotional response is much more effective at attaching words to those things than you just writing or thinking or praying. Talking with somebody else, they're going to ask you questions that you're not asking yourself. So real dialogue is a significant component of transition. So that was the whole video that we watched before about conversation. So that matters from a physiological perspective. And recognise that our emotional centres act from this framework of attitudes about life. So you might not be able to change how your limbic brain functions, but you can adjust over time the framework or the operating system that it's running from. Does that make sense? That set of values and beliefs we can deliberately adjust over time. So there are 4 things that we can do in response to this information. Change is inherently complex. It is fundamentally emotional. It is always social, and it is story-based. Yeah, it's complex. It's emotional. It's social, and it's story-based. So there we go. My hope is that having some understanding of the strange things that our brains do when faced with change, that little bit of understanding has sort of demystified that a little bit. And in being demystified, then maybe it's lost some of its potency when we're feeling under the effects of those emotional things. You know, we all face difficult situations, and if we're not now, then they're coming. And I think our ability to tackle those things here and not just here is a big part of what it means to flourish through change. So it can be as simple as talking about our emotional responses to change. And when we do that, two things happen. It can shed light on our deepest attitudes and beliefs, and it can shift the information of that change to a part of our brain that can actually do something about it.